The future of work is here. A new reality of work and life balance is unfolding, with more and more people choosing to work remotely. How is this trend impacting the Nordic countries? What strategies is each of them applying? And how are urban and rural regions affected by remote work? Join the discussion with speakers and experts from all the Nordic countries. Welcome to Nordregio Forum 2021.
Good afternoon and welcome to Nordic Culture Point here in Helsinki, Finland. It's our pleasure to welcome you to day one of the 9th annual Nordregio Forum. My name is Ryan Weber and I'll be your co-host today with my colleague Linda Randall.
Good afternoon.
So today's topic for this day one of Nordregio Forum. During the past 20 months, I think all of us have become immersed in the concepts and principles of remote work. I don't think we need to look any further than the fact that we're hosting this Nordregio Forum for the second year in a row as a digital or hybrid event. But remote work has been a trend that's been with us for years, for decades even. But it's this experience or emergence through the pandemic that has caused a major influence on how each and every one of us envision or think about their home-work relationship. Our objective for today is to discuss how remote work could have important regional development implications for different types of regions in the future and in a Nordic context. And here it's important to distinguish between first order or immediate impacts of remote work on regional development and second order or downstream impacts that could influence the longer term perspective of regional development. And how might these second order impacts come to be? Well, I think there's a comparison here to be made to climate change. We know that climate change will directly cause sea level rise and changing weather patterns that overall will lead to warming throughout the world. But it's the second order impacts associated with climate change, caused by this initial warming, the melting of permafrost, ocean acidification, that will lead to far-reaching and long-term implications caused by climate change. So the onset of these downstream or second order effects, that's why climate scientists often refer to the irreversible nature of climate change and the need for action today.
So I guess maybe to come back and see if we can apply that analogy to our topic today of remote work and multi-locality. So I mean, what do we know? We know, of course, that many Nordic workers have been working remotely during the pandemic. We also know that a substantial portion of those would really like to actually continue with at least some greater degree of flexibility going into the future, regardless of how the public health situation plays out. The most common kind of desire, I guess, is for a kind of a hybrid setup, but we know that there is also a small but substantial proportion of workers who see themselves working completely remotely in the future. But what's less clear, I think, is these second-order impacts that Ryan talks about. So for us as regional and urban development and rural development workers, it's this question of how this trend of remote work will actually affect our cities, our regions, and our rural areas. So if people can work from anywhere, where will they go and where will they choose to spend their time? So from an urban perspective, will we see sort of a greater trend towards localization with different demands for neighbourhoods and maybe even suburbs? If we think of rural areas, could this be really an opportunity for some of the rural municipalities that have been struggling with depopulation and ageing and the negative consequences associated with that? On a larger scale, do we see even a reimagining of regional labour markets and the way that competence is distributed around the Nordic region? So,
Great. Thanks, Linda. So we're very excited to share the next couple of hours with all of you, both live and digitally. We're going to start with a few keynote presentations, followed by discussion together with you, our audience. We're then going to go on a Nordic tour to hear from regional experts working with these issues of remote work on the ground. We encourage all of you to join the discussions, whether that can be through chat, through asking questions, providing comments or feedback, or links to critical or important information and research that you have access to. So following the keynote presentations, we'll have time for some questions from you, the audience, as well as during our Nordic tour. And just before I hand over the opening word, I want to remind all of you that we are recording this session, and it will be available to you afterwards to review or to share with your colleagues in your social networks. So, to begin, I'm very excited to give the opening word to Jukka Ihanus. Welcome. Jukka is the State Secretary of the Finnish Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment. Hello, Jukka.
Thank you. Dear Nordic colleagues, I am honored to welcome you all Nordregio Forum 2021. We would have been very happy to meet you all in face-to-face. Finnish presidency in the Nordic Council is coming to an end. During our presidency in the field of regional development and planning, the focus has been on two themes, multi-locality and green recovery. These themes were discussed in the ministerial meeting in September, and I'm delighted to see that we have a chance to continue discussion here in Helsinki today. Dear participants, I want to begin with saying that our economy and environment are totally connected. Even if we live in the middle of COVID crisis, we cannot wait to take up climate change. The climate action is a golden opportunity. A green transition requires new technologies that accelerate move away from fossil fuels. It will create new business, new innovation and capabilities. At the same time, there will be huge demand for climate-friendly solutions. It is a possibility for Nordic countries to utilize and develop the expertise we have to reach the climate goals and boost our export industry. All the roads are now leading to the north. Low-carbon economy requires that we invest to renew our old industries and build new ones. It will also create new jobs and welfare across the Nordic region. Almost every day we hear news about private sector plans and investments that move us toward net zero world. At the same time, it's important that we make sure that transition is both socially and regionally just. I think it's fundamental that green transition takes into account different kind of regions and living conditions. Local and regional roadmaps that involve different stakeholders are one way to ensure that transition is just. Dear participants, let's go back to the main theme. We have seen multi-locational lifestyle as a new source of vitality, especially for rural regions. Working from multiple locations, remote work are phenomena that have intensified during pandemic. Likewise, people living and working in multiple location companies and public services can also be multi-local. On the other hand, the multi-locality may also mean study and service opportunities from anywhere via remote connections. I believe that digitalization and high-speed data connection are key elements that also support multi-locality. At its best, multi-locality and remote working creates new economic and social innovation and provides economic growth. Furthermore, it increases the economic and social vitality of cities and regions. On the other hand, we need to make sure that promoting multi-locality is done sustainably. Finally, in order to gain added value from Nordic cooperation, we need to have common understanding of multi-locality and its different aspects. Therefore, I'm delighted that there are already ongoing Nordic projects of remote work that we will hear more about today. In addition, the regional ministers decided on a new research project that will build common ground for promoting sustainable multi-locality. I wish you all a pleasant and fruitful seminar that will inspire thoughts and help us learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jukka. Thank you very much, Jukka. Sweden's Remote Lab is a knowledge and development node for the future of remote work. We're thrilled to be joined by one of its co-founders, Maria Svensson Wiklander, who has also founded Godmorgon Östersund, a co-working space with 3 locations in the north of Sweden. Maria, welcome, and tell us more about the future of remote work.
Thank you, Ryan, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm very happy that I got invited and that I could be able to participate in person as well. So my name is Maria Svensson Wiklander, and I am one of the co-founders to the, I will see if I have my presentation ready as well. There it goes. Sorry about that. I am one of the co-founders of the Remote Lab, which is a knowledge and development node for the future of remote work. And as Ryan said, I'm also one of the co-founders of the co-working space Godmorgon Östersund. And we launched this 5 years ago, and we do have 3 locations today in the middle of Östersund, in the region of Jämtland, in the middle of Sweden. And the Remote Lab was founded the 24th of August in 2020, but we had been working with this initiative for much longer than that, about 2 or 3 years before that. And I have my background as an entrepreneur, and I have been starting and running different organizations that has been remote first and remote for a long time. So I've been working about 12 years with this. And we found a knowledge gap, not only in research, but also within organizations and within individuals. And we also found that remote work was a global trend that was accelerating. And our vision today is to help organizations and society and individuals into becoming more remote friendly and actually then changing the way they work. And we do this by collaborating with, for instance, research institutes, with universities, and also research environments across the world. But we also have gathered a community of remote-first entrepreneurs, best practice practitioners that has a long background within remote first. And we also then collect tech companies and startups that are developing service towards this area. So today we are part of different research projects, such as, for instance, the Cost Action Network, and the geography of new working spaces and the impact on periphery, but also another Swedish research initiative called Fairtrans, where we look at how we can distribute or share the carbon budget in Sweden in an equal way by 2030, and where remote could be a way of going forward and one of the solutions. But we also do our own reports, and so far we launched 5 reports, and we are currently working with 2 more. And we are usually doing it by external monitoring and using a method developed by Institute for the Future, which is a future thinking institute in Palo Alto, San Francisco, which is also one of our collaborators. And they have developed this method called signal scanning. And when we do signal scanning, we go outside to look for signals of change. That could be, for instance, attitude or behavioral changes, or it could be research results or articles or new innovations that can tell us something about the world we live in today. And what would happen if they scaled and became a new norm? What would happen to society? What would happen to organizations and also to individuals? We also do courses and different kinds and a lot of consultancy work and organizational scanning. But we do also do dissemination of knowledge, and that we do mostly on our website. So go in there to check out our reports and to learn more about what we're doing. But these following techno-economic paradigm theories I have borrowed from the professor Carlota Perez. And we have experienced 5 industrial revolutions, which follows basically the same patterns. It begins with an installation period that is followed by different bubbles. And these are turning points, and they are disrupting these installation periods. And these turning points is followed by a golden age. And so far we have experienced 2 bubbles in this current industrial revolution that we are in now, and we are experiencing our 3rd at the moment. So the first one was the dot-com boom, the second one was the global casino in 2008, and this current pandemic is obviously then the last one, or at least the third one. And in 2018, Perez gave a keynote speech at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where she predicted that a bubble would emerge that would make way for a green golden age. And in this green golden age, and in order for this green golden age to flourish, two things are needed. An active state tilting the playing field in that direction by giving incentives and investments, but also the emergence of a new lifestyle, which needs to be something that we strive for, the aspirational good life. And a flexible way of working and remote work is a part of that. And we can already see this among top of income and education scale, but also among young. My generation, Generation Millennials, but also the following generation said, we value autonomy and flexibility over salary and career paths. And we can also see in Sweden that we have been the leading country within remote work in Europe for a long time. These figures come from Eurofund, and it shows that in 2019 we had approximately 33% that worked remotely, more or less. 3% worked usually remotely, and 30% worked sometimes remotely. And that had doubled since 2009, when we had 16% that worked remotely. So we could see a clear trend around this, even the last decade. And we can also see in reports that was published just a couple of weeks before the pandemic hit us, a report called Svenskarnas inställning till distansarbete, that almost 90% of the respondents in this study thought that remote work was important, and almost 72% would say no to a job if remote work wasn't a possibility. And we can also see during the pandemic that a lot of reports have shown that 9 out of 10 people want to continue to work remotely, more or less, even after the pandemic. And we can see approximately the same figures in the US. But the employers aren't keeping up, and neither is the state. And a lot of organizations haven't yet decided upon or communicated their strategy on going forward when it comes to remote work. And this causes a lot of stress and anxiety among employees. Studies from McKinsey has shown, that was published this spring. And we can currently see that we are in the middle of the Great Resignation, and that is a fact. And a lot of people are leaving their work. They want to shift their lifestyle into becoming more sustainable for themselves. And this is not only a trend in the US, it's also a global trend by now. And we can also see increasing moving patterns that, for instance, big cities are experiencing net loss, while smaller cities are experiencing net growth in inhabitants. So these are examples from the US, New Zealand, Great Britain, and Sweden. And during the pandemic and the isolation that we experienced in the pandemic, being close to nature and also green areas have become increasingly important for us. And in Sweden, it's quite clear. We can see that people are moving out of the big cities in a much greater extent than before, to, for instance, commuting municipalities near larger cities, or to smaller towns or urban areas, or to municipalities with tourism industries. And when coming back after the pandemic, organizations might find themselves in the situation that key employees might have just changed their lifestyle and moved away in order to make that remote work, and actually then being able to do that in the future as well, whereas the organization needs to shift their way of working. And something that is also becoming more increasingly important for us is the social connection, the close communities, and also solidarity towards each other. And we can see that grassroots-driven development taking off, forming new kind of communities. Co-working is popping up basically everywhere. We are currently now doing a mapping of all co-working spaces in Sweden in each municipality. And only in our region, in Jämtland, which is the size of Denmark, but with a population of approximately 130,000 inhabitants, we have 32 co-working hubs at this moment. So this is not a big city phenomenon anymore. It's a new catalyst for building local community. And also for driving grassroots-driven societal development. And when workers are more often hired in remote positions, this connection between local workforce and also local employers are being more visible. And these communities also function as introduction to new inhabitants and local communities. So working from home actually made us consider what is truly valuable for us. But the willingness to live a more sustainable life for oneself is also something that has been already inside of us, but it has been enhanced during the pandemic, at least for me. Thank you.
Okay. I can't let you run away just yet. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was struck by this one figure that we saw where it was rural communities and the growth that's taking place in those communities, but it said rural communities with tourism industries.
Yeah.
I thought that that was an important note to make, and I look over to some of our speakers a little bit later on about the underlying potentials of these regions and what they can do to attract people to move there. So I think that this is a very important component. One question, you talked about signals of change and the employer response. Have you come across any sorts of new developments or creative or innovative ways that employers are responding to this demand from their staff and from the labor market as a whole to how they can accommodate remote workers and the remote work phenomenon in their businesses as they transition?
Yeah, of course, we have done that. There's a lot of examples out there. The most famous one that people, at least in Sweden, bring up is, of course, Spotify.
Oh.
That has been able to actually now just 10 miles or Swedish miles from where I live in Åre, they just started an own office there because a lot of people moved to Jämtland from Spotify when they were able to work from anywhere. So they just left.
And are you seeing anything in terms of companies that are maybe, it's not a co-work space, but multiple companies going together and making investments in offices as a solution to having sort of a distributed network of offices? Has this something that you've come across at all in a Nordic context or in Sweden?
Yeah, definitely. If we look at real estate companies that we work a lot with, for instance, they are working from 4 different scenarios now. Which is one is the menu office where you actually choose where to sit for the day. Like you can choose from a variety of different offices. A shared office possibility where you actually have Monday to Tuesday for one company and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for another one. And then they just change the signage depending on the company. And then we have the co-living and community office where you actually have more project-intense companies that go there, they live there for a few months and then they are off again. And the third one is, of course, the hubs, where you bring the workplace closer to people, where people live.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's clear that this is not a black and white or a remote and not remote issue. There is a lot in between.
It's a grayscale, yeah.
Thank you very much, Maria, and we'll have you back for the panel discussion in a little while.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go digital for our next presentation. We have Lamia Kamal Chaoui with us. She is the director of the OECD Centre for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities. And she is joining us to describe remote working, how remote working is shaping regional development in a hopefully post-COVID era. Welcome, Lamia.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Can hear you perfectly.
Great. So Director Elmer, State Secretary Ihanus, distinguished speakers, dear participants, I'm really delighted to be part of the Nordregio Forum 2021 on the regional impact of remote work. I would like to thank you for the kind invitation, of course, and for our strong partnership in recent years, which actually culminated just this month with our joint event at COP26 on rural policies and climate change. So, ladies and gentlemen, the shift to remote working has really affected us all. They are positives, not least because remote working and the shift to virtual conferences allows me to be with you today from Paris. But actually, the potential social and economic implications of a long-term shift to remote working are much more profound. The fact is that the shift to remote working has not been a smooth or an equal transition. It has not been a smooth or equal transition for people, and it has not been a smooth or equal transition for places. Over the last year at the OECD, we have been working closely with experts, with governments and businesses to analyze the impact of remote working across different regions. And I'm pleased to share with you today some of the findings, including some of the possible scenarios for regional development that we have identified. But let me first highlight the scale of the shift. In 2015, only around 9% of workers in the EU had used ICT outside of their employers' premises. And that figure has been growing, but our surveys suggest that on the eve of the pandemic, still only 16% of employees were teleworking. And by April 2020, this had suddenly surged to nearly 40% of employees. And in some countries, the shift was even more staggering. I'm thinking, for instance, about the fact that nearly half of employees were teleworking in the UK, in Denmark, and in Ireland, and nearly 60% in Finland. It is clear that this transition to teleworking has really helped protect many jobs, many firms, and many communities during social distancing. But there is a but, not all were so lucky. And our analysis shows that on average, across the OECD, the share of jobs amenable to teleworking can vary by 15 percentage points across regions within countries. And this difference can reach more than 20 percentage points in countries like the Czech Republic, in France, in Hungary, and the United States, for instance. So we can say that a very significant gap has opened up between regions in their ability to weather the crisis through teleworking. And there were other type of inequalities too, with, for instance, more educated and better paid workers better able to shift to teleworking than poorer groups, for instance. So the first clear and immediate impact of the shift to teleworking has been to actually exacerbate many disparities in employment opportunities that used to prevail before. And while government support packages have helped many of these people and places, the impact and scars will continue to run deep for years to come. But looking beyond the immediate impacts on employment, as remote working has become a kind of new normal for many workers, this shift will fundamentally change where people will choose to live and work across OECD cities and regions. Because indeed, the ability to work virtually has, of course, opened up new opportunities for workers to seek a new life outside of city centers, where they can find more affordable property, lower cost of living, and better amenities and work-life balance, as well as, of course, giving up the painful daily commute, which in Paris, we are experimenting that every day. And of course, new opportunities for firms too, who are able to cut the cost of office space in central locations and access a larger labor pool. The enforced trial during COVID-19 has convinced many of these benefits. While data suggests that remote working will increase, but still not be a majority working practice, actually building the evidence based on the benefits associated with working from home has helped overcome skepticism and prejudices against remote working and remote workers that we have seen in many countries. A recent survey undertaken by the Japanese government, for instance, found that close to 14% of the companies headquartered in Tokyo, they were considering changing their real estate strategy because of the pandemic, with nearly half of this company expecting to downscale their office space and the remainder expecting to relocate part of or all of their office in other places. But before we get carried away, let me say that we at the OECD, we believe a large-scale exodus from cities is unlikely over the short and medium term for several reasons. I know there have been a lot of articles in the press about that. First, because surveys still indicate that most employers are likely to still require at least part-time attendance in the office from their workers, keeping them close to, if not in, their cities of employment. Second, because many cities retain important assets and amenities, which will continue to appeal to residents, including accessibility to retail, leisure, entertainment, social and public services, health services, of course. And third, because the stock and the availability of housing, particularly social housing, will remain important anchors for current populations over the short and medium term. In our recent OECD report entitled Implications of Remote Working Adoption on Place-Based Policies, we used real-time mobile phone activities in G7 countries to show that urban residents were staying put. There was no evidence of large-scale relocations. But this being said, we cannot afford, of course, to be complacent. We do anticipate a long-term reduction in workers' physical presence in city centers and fewer inflows to cities, as people are able to access city jobs without necessarily the need to move there permanently. And our work has shown that how the availability of occasional teleworking can massively expand the geographic range of opportunities available to workers without necessarily moving. However, this shift will create pressures on different places. And let me tell you about some of the scenarios we are likely to have. City paradox, which anticipates a permanent movement of high-skilled workers outside large city centers, and this creates pressure to reclaim and reuse vacant urban infrastructure, as well as accommodate new growth pressures in smaller cities and rural regions. This is the first scenario. The second one is a case where actually commuting zone around city expand as a high-skilled worker move to the outskirts of large cities, thus creating a donut effect. Again, this will require a rethinking on how we use urban space, both in the center in accommodating residential demand in the suburbs. The third scenario is the rise of intermediate cities, meaning mid-sized cities, towns, or semi-dense areas, which become increasingly attractive to workers with highly teleworkable jobs. And last but not least, the fourth scenario would be a kind of business as a usual case where there is overall a greater adoption of remote working, but workers would remain in large cities to stay close to workplaces. So the question is, which of these four scenarios is likely to prevail? Well, in reality, we are likely to see elements of all these scenarios going forward as different places adjust to their own new normal. And however, there is a however, and very important for policymakers, in all of these scenarios, cities will need to look to improve their offer to attract increasingly footloose firms and workers. And actually, in our work, we have seen that many of these cities are already looking to do so. They are reinventing themselves to improve their livability and the well-being of their residents. Here in Paris, where I live and where the OECD is headquartered, this is a big debate in the city hall. Actually, the current local administration is redefining its urban planning and public transport strategy toward more compact and walkable neighborhoods around the concept of the 15-minute city. Cities like Tokyo are taking advantage of changes in firms' real estate strategy to ease housing affordability, and there are many, many more examples. So the question is, how can governments stay ahead of the game and react to this uncertain future? Well, first, it is critically important that governments at all levels act to tackle the digital divide and the inequalities exacerbated by the pandemic between people and places. And in particular, there is now an urgent need to close the gap in digital access, particularly as our last edition of the report, Regions and Cities at Glance, where we compile all the data at subnational level. This report showed that 1 in 3 rural households, on average in the OECD, do not have high-speed broadband. And I'm talking about OECD countries. I'm not talking about developing countries. There is also a need to invest in digital skills for workers and ICT capacity for firms, especially in small and medium-sized enterprises who continue to lag in adoption and for whom digital adoption gaps with larger firms have grown over the last decade. We have largely documented this fact in our work in the OECD. And as one example of policy action in this space, I'm thinking about the Regional Agency for Economic Development of the Basque Country in Spain, which set up a team of technology advisors who provide free support to help self-employed and micro firms find solutions on teleworking, cyber security, and e-commerce. A second area for government intervention, medium-sized cities and towns need to grasp the opportunity to improve connectivity, amenities, and quality of life as a means of attracting and retaining skilled workers. And that includes improving public transport to larger employment centers for occasional office workers, as well as enhancing the cultural and leisure offer and the availability and quality of public services. We are working on this issue in the OECD, and together with the G20 last presidency and probably with the next, we will strengthen this area of work. As a third area of policy actions, governments should seek to anticipate and manage population changes to ensure that outcomes from remote working are efficient and environmentally sustainable. And this will require adopting more flexible policies on land use and housing, adapting vacated office space and underutilized infrastructure, and better integrating rural and urban transport systems, for instance. Cities may also need to find ways to balance their public finances and manage declining revenues. It is another issue that we have been tracking. the declining revenue related, for instance, to the loss of commuter fares and land taxes from office. This is a key issue that we have absolutely to monitor. So, dear participants, teleworking has already had a profound impact on people, on places, and on firms, and it will continue to do so for years to come. Policymakers at all levels, in all regions and cities, must be prepared to respond, to tackle the challenges, but also to embrace the opportunities that arise, and at the OECD, we really stand ready to support them. I want to flag that as part of our effort to support countries and regions in their recovery, we are developing now a place-based toolkit for local development on the future of teleworking. And we have also established recently a new regional recovery platform of good practices and data, where we are, among other things, using foresight to look more closely at different scenarios for regional development. And next month, the OECD Global Strategy Group, which brings together ministers, G7 and G20 Sherpas and senior officials, they will discuss the new geography of teleworking and how the OECD can support countries in dealing with these challenges and opportunities. So with these tools and with the strong partnership that we have been able to build with North region over the years, and with and together with the international community more broadly, I'm really confident that we can support better all cities and regions to adapt to the new normal. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lamia. It's interesting to hear cities are not going anywhere, but you also touched on some important points that it's easy for us to sometimes overlook. Not only the opportunities and the potentials for remote work, but the threat to the types of jobs that can either not be transitioned to remote work, and perhaps equally so, the jobs that become at risk because of an overall transition to remote work. I thank you very much for these insights, and these are certainly perspectives we're going to take up in the rest of our discussion today. Thank you, Lamia.
We have a question in the chat, Ryan, if there is time.
Unfortunately, there's not so much time for questions now, but I encourage that person in the chat to hold that question for our general discussion. Thanks. So, we've been introduced to some key perspectives of remote work in a Swedish context, in an OECD or an international context. Let's dig into this a little bit further, both about some of the more discrete implications and important regional impacts of remote work, and perhaps with a focus a bit for a few minutes on Finland. If you work with urban and regional development issues in Finland, you are aware of MDI, the Consultancy for Regional Development. We're very much appreciate to have you here today with us, Sari, as a lead analyst, and you, Janne, as a co-founder and development director, and many other hats, I'm sure. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing with remote work. I know that the term multilocality is also an important concept that's used in Finnish policy circles. So how do these two terms and these perspectives, how are they being discussed and described and analyzed in a Finnish context these days?
First of all, thanks for the invitation. It's a privilege to be here in Nordregio Forum. As an old Nordregier, it's always great to be here. And one thing about this multilocality in Finland is that it's the buzzword of the year on all levels. It's on national level, it's on a local level. And we have had a good research project for Prime Minister's office handling multilocality, which is what we're going to do now, that we are going to show a little bit about the concept and the trends that we are seeing, very much following Maria's and Lamia's thoughts. But we are happy to have new evidence also on that. So I'm happy to show you some results from that project. But this is a teaser. We are not officially published that results yet, but next month or January you will see the final report.
Great.
Yeah, and we also have a presentation.
Yes.
It's coming up. So basically, I can already start when the presentation is loading. So we have been doing this research project for the Prime Minister's office. The project is called Sustainable Multi-Local Living in Finland Now and in 2030. We have been doing the project in a consortium together with the Natural Resources Institute Finland and the Finnish Environmental Institute. It's a large project, very long one, more than 1.5 years, and we actually started it. We wrote the plan before COVID. So we were just in time, actually. So we started the project in the spring of 2020, and we will finish it now in a month, and we should be publishing the report in January, hopefully. As in the presentation, I will not be reading it through fully, but the presentation basically shows that we have used quite a wide concept of multilocality, meaning that the people spend their everyday life or leisure time in several places or traveling between them rather than being fixed in one place. And we have like 5 main motives for the multilocalities. So work and study, leisure, family, or forced multilocation, or ownership-based. Of course, here today we are talking about the work-related multilocality, which includes commuting, remote work, but also seasonal work. This is also important. But as we are in Finland, this is the the home of thousands and thousands of summer houses. We had to include also the leisure-based multilocality, which is fundamentally important in Finland. It might not be so in other places, but here it is. So we have more than 500,000 leisure homes, which about half of the population uses them. So this is a significant activity here. And why it is important in this respect is that it shifts the population in the country.
Maybe can I ask a quick question here, because this issue of second homes, I think a lot of us, when at least thinking about remote work, have the impression, well, I can go and work from my summer house, or I can go and work from my winter cabin. But let's take a look first at what do the initial results say of both in terms of the current population, but the population scenarios for the future based on different implications of remote work. And then maybe we can also say something about those second homes.
Yeah, and we actually have a map for you about the development trend and also the future trends. And of course, the question is that are you able to work from your second home or where you're spending your time? And this is good for Nordic countries, of course, because we have a very good infrastructure for this kind of working. And for that reason, you could see the figures from Sari's table earlier that it's 1.2 million people that have remote worked during the pandemic, and that's of course made possible by technology. And this is now already making trend shifts in Finland in terms of regional development. And now if we can see those maps soon, on the map we can see that how actually the migration pattern has already turned a little bit during the pandemic area. We don't know if this is for long time, but on this map on your left, you can see that there is the migration between municipalities this year from January to September. And I don't know, you're not everybody familiar with Finnish geography, but you can see that there is one big news. You see Helsinki, Espoo and Vantaa red in this map, and red means that you're losing population to outside areas. This has happened to me. I've been working in these issues for 25 years. I haven't seen this before. This is something that was in 70s taking place. I have to underline that this is net migration between municipalities, people are moving from abroad to Helsinki still, and that's helping. And we have young population here, so that helps. But what you can see that there is the suburbanization. People are moving to surrounding municipalities. This is the Lamia story also, and that's also due to the remote work. They need the office space. They need that one extra room, and they can afford it in the fringe municipalities. But what you can see, the other winners with the blue color in that, those are the university cities and Seinäjoki, in addition with the strong education institutes. So you can see that the middle-sized cities are attracting people. And then third category, where the tourist attraction places with second homes and tourist attractions like Åre in Sweden. Mm-hmm. So those are definitely the trends that you can see during this era. And then on the other map, you could see that there is the future leisure time activities. It follows the big trends in population. The age structure shows that it will be more spread, but it's around the large cities and the corridors, the good accessibility, which is the strongest driver behind this trend.
So agglomeration effects are important, commuting networks are important, and the underlying characteristics or attractors in those small or medium-sized towns. I mean, we heard it from you and we heard it from Maria, these underlying tourism infrastructure or attractions to different types of places.
Yeah, people are, they need the services. It's easy living. That's what big amount of people are requiring. So that's why they are attracting people. And that's actually very good for a lot of rural areas, also here in Finland. Mm-hmm. But it's not for all. Yeah. Not all the rural areas has this infrastructure and services. We have to keep that in mind.
So underlying potentials matter.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sari and Janne, what about cities? We heard Lamia say that cities aren't going anywhere. What do we see in Finland for our bigger cities? What sorts of morphologies or adaptations to the urban structure or challenges or potentials for our largest city areas? How is your work shedding light on these types of issues from a larger urban perspective because of remote work?
Well, as Janne was saying earlier, the capital area is losing some population, and actually even from the capital area, people are moving just a bit further. So there is impact, especially in the city center, and this is something that we have been thinking that for those who are building housing or planning housing in the cities, they should actually consider more living space or the living space requirements. That should they be planning for an extra office room, or should there be, for example, local hubs in the suburbs? Mm-hmm. That one of the things we have also been considering is that at the moment, if people are just working from their homes, it's not very socially sustainable. Both from the point of view of the family who has to always watch out for not being on Teams, or from the point of view of people actually getting isolated, and this affects innovation. Mm-hmm. So in order for remote work to be socially sustainable, there has to be something. But on the other hand, just the same way as Maria was saying, it's also a potential for the local development of the suburbs or rural areas or smaller towns, because people are actually spending more time there. They will also require more services, like lunches, mm-hmm. or if you don't always want to eat at home, you want services there. So instead of those being areas where people just go to sleep, mm-hmm. they could actually be revitalized. Or vitalized.
And this is pretty much the new line of strategy also for these fringe municipalities. It's not only about living, it's about working. And you could say it's micro-urbanization. In a smaller scale, you try to bring in people and services.
So this is being tackled from a strategic, you're seeing more and more to be tackled from a strategic perspective in these suburban, fringe, and peri-urban types of municipalities?
It is, and also the cities are like counter-attacking also this, that they are thinking, how do we bring the life back to the city centers, which are now pretty quiet? So that's a big question for Helsinki, for example. How do they bring people in?
So the competition for residents continues, but perhaps in a reversed order or reversed manner. Thank you very much, Janne and Sarah, and I ask you not to go anywhere. And perhaps, Maria, you can join us again up on the screen as you come on. Thank you very much. We now have time for questions from the audience. So I have some great communications experts here in the audience with microphones and manning the computer. Can you provide us with some questions or insight that we have from today from different guests?
Yes, and you in the audience are also welcome, but I know, Vaida, you already have some questions from the chat.
Yes, I'll be monitoring it online, and there are some questions to Maria when it comes to trends in Sweden, whether working from home or working from the co-working space is a more common trend, and also how does it affect newly starting careers? Like, how do people are people courage enough to start a career remotely in Sweden? And then I could pose maybe a question later to Finland.
Yeah, the response to that is basically to the first question that, yeah, we can see an increased number of co-working spaces in Sweden, definitely. And the mapping hasn't been done yet, but we are currently working on it. So we've been reaching out to different municipalities, and we can see that this is much larger than we've seen before, or that we anticipated before. And also the number of people sitting in co-working spaces then, of course. But we have also, during the pandemic, been forced to onboard our new employees into this new, into a remote setting and not meeting each other. So we haven't actually had the possible to choose. This has also forced the organizations to do better onboarding programs. And there's also studies that a lot of people, 80% or more of people, are experiencing bad onboarding when they start. So this is definitely something that organizations need to work on. And I think that we can see an increasing number of automated onboarding and more thought through onboarding, which then allows people to be onboarded remotely more effective. So it's an organizational development problem.
Thank you. And the question about Finland, how does this shifting trend affect the education of children? Is it more common to do the homeschooling, or actually there is more trend towards the centralization of education in response to this trend?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think that will take some time before we see the effects on a schooling system. But of course, in Finland, the welfare structure, which was built 30 years, 40 years ago, is now also in a structural change, and the school network is looked very critically what kind of network we can afford, and this is a huge question for especially the rural areas. What is the effect? And now this trend that has happened has given few extra years to some small schools, because there are families moving to the rural areas, and there is some light for some of the villages, not all of them, but some of the villages. And of course, when we are looking at the migration trends, even the small amount of migration can be relationally very big for a small municipality. So it has a tiny effect on a local level, but on a general level, we see also concentration on that trend in Finland as well.
Yeah, I will continue from here. In terms of who is multi-local in Finland, especially those people who spend a lot of time at their summer houses are the ones who are not so bound by work life or the structures that we have. So basically the ones whose children don't live at home anymore, or who do not have children, because the kids are quite unilocal in a sense that there has been discussion about how to make the school network or going to school more flexible, so that you could, for example, live somewhere for half of the year and still have the kids go to school somewhere. So there have been some examples, but as a practice, there is one school place in one school for a child, and that makes the family is quite fixed in one place. So even if the work is independent of the location, the family might not be.
Maybe a quick follow-up question on this to Maria as well. I know you said that Jämtland, for example, your region in the north of Sweden, has seen an increase of families as well, working, for example, in Åre. Maybe you could comment on that. So that has probably affected the local schools there.
Yeah, we have seen different, or we have seen actually last year was the first year that Jämtland as a region grew, had experienced a net growth since the 70s. So we have experienced a lot of municipalities in Jämtland are experiencing net growth right now. And a lot of them come from the big cities as well. But yeah, we've seen, what was the exact question? Sorry. But yeah.
It's really how do you adjust the school system to this, the multi-locality or the multi-locational lifestyle, and if we see any implications of how, if schools try to respond and work more multi-locational, or if it changes the setting for small schools with more students coming in.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of examples where people actually have brought the kids to be able to work from Östersund for part of the time, like digital nomads, and they put their kids in school or childcare, and it hasn't been really a problem. So the municipalities have met up on that. But we can also see that a lot of different projects are now emerging. For instance, in Kaxås, a small village in Jämtland, where they actually built 40 new houses for families from all over the world to move into, just to make the school work or to have a proper enough kids to go to school, so they didn't have to close it. So it's a lot of great examples out there.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Over here.
Yes, hi, my name is Pipsa Salalammi, and I would like to ask maybe all of you, or maybe one of you could answer. I know that maybe this hasn't been studied as much as the other aspects of multilocality, but if people are increasingly buying bigger houses for extra room, and they're also maybe commuting from one place to the other more, how is this affecting the climate policies that we're also trying to pursue at the moment? More heating costs for bigger houses and more mileages on trains or cars or airplanes. How will this remote work that's so popular now, how will this affect the climate aspirations that we have?
That is another great question, and I was just looking at our research project title, which says Sustainable Multilocal Living, which is exactly this question that we know that it's not going to be sustainable in all levels, and this is big question that how do we actually see the future? Is the multilocality spread all over the space, or is it more like focused, micro-urbanized, which we are trying to support then also in Finland? So that should be a big concern, that we see the effects of multilocality also in the environmental aspect.
Do you know, are any of you aware of any sorts of research projects or analysis that's currently being done or in discussions to be done that can actually start to critically consider the impact or potential that this can have, either the potential to support climate or carbon neutrality, or the challenges that it presents? Maria, I see.
Yeah, the project, the research project that we are involved with the Stockholm Resilience Centre and Stockholm University and KTH and the Högskolan Gävle, for instance, that is called Fairtrans, are looking into exactly this. So we've just kicked off the project. It was launched in September, so we're just started. But we'll be looking into this. It's super relevant questions.
Yeah, and actually our project includes also an assessment of the economic, environmental and social sustainability of multilocality, and in the recommendations we will be discussing ways on how to make the current multi-locality more sustainable. They include, especially with regard to the second housing, a lot of issues with energy efficiency and transport, but then also work-related sustainability. A lot of it is related to transport. And then how do we get people to use public transport? How is it? But the issue is then that how can we sustain public transport at the level where people actually want to use it, and where the service level is good enough if people only go into the office once a week? And this is a major issue. Then, so this is something that should be solved. But then also the more sustainable personal transport vehicles. This is also something. But yes, so we are looking into this, and it's very, very, very interesting.
Great. I believe we have another question from the audience.
Yes, another audience question.
Yes, I'll just follow up on the sustainability question, because of course when we get into multi-local living, we'll also change our behavior. If you move out into a rural area or having more space, then you will maybe start to grow a bit of vegetables yourself, and you will have a more local, lower your consumption. Most research shows that the more you earn, the more you consume, and the more you emit of CO2 emissions. So I want to be the devil's advocate, because I think that you could maybe lower the CO2 emissions if you move out on the cities.
Many aspects. Any more questions? Yes.
Many employers are looking for talented workforce for the moment. Have you looked into the available jobs that are out there? How many of those are actually stating now that this job can be done remotely? Do you know the percentages?
I do have the percentages from a study that Hire.com did, and they are looking at top talent. So it's mainly, or they are working all across the globe, but they are mainly in the US. But they stated that more than half of the jobs available right now were open for remote positions, but also that it's tech and sales that is really in demand right now. And 93% of the applicants were stating that they wanted to work remotely.
And in our studies, it was approximately 40% of work which can be done remotely, but it's mainly white-collar jobs. So it's, of course, a question of economic structure and what can be available in respective regions. But you can see that this is definitely a trend that also, like ministries, are now picking up. They have these job advisements saying that you can do this in whatever place in Finland. So this is definitely a stronger trend in Finland as well.
Great. We have just 2 minutes left, so a tough question for the last question and only a couple minutes to answer. Oh, that's not, thanks, Janne. That's very nice. The public sector is often seen as potentially being a leader, relocating offices to different parts of the country. What do we see right now, either in Finland or in Sweden, about the public sector taking some sort of proactive measures or a leadership position in the transition to remote work? Or are they not doing that? What is the situation in terms of public sector work and remote work?
Well, I can start. Well, in Finland, the government is actually taking quite a good lead now. And there is a project where the government is actually considering a new strategy for multi-local work. But there, the term multi-local means that you could do the work from different offices around the country. So they're actually looking at the service network and what kind of jobs could be done remotely, and where do they need people to be in. But then, you know, like they're mapping the entire country, and they are making then a strategy. And this one, if I remember correctly, it should be ready in the winter.
Excellent. Good to know. Maria?
Yeah, it's funny that you ask because we are actually the project leaders of that in Sweden. So next week we will be opening up Samverket, which is the national concept for co-working for governmental organizations and the public sector. So that will be opened in Stockholm and in Östersund as basically a test to see how, and then evaluate it to build a national concept for co-working for municipalities, regions, and also then public sector and governments.
Great. The public sector engine is moving. Great. Sari, Janne, Maria, Lamia, thank you very much for this contribution so far. It's been very much appreciated. And now I look forward to handing it over to you, Linda, to take us on a Nordic tour.
Yes. And I also extend my thanks. I think we have now a really good overview of the issue that we speak to here today. And so now we're gonna get a little bit more local, and we're actually gonna go on a Nordic tour. So I hope in one moment I will be joined by our first guest, who is Stefan Damsgaard from the Rural Advisory Board of Denmark. Do we have Denmark? Oh,
Stefan.
Hey, Stefan. Hey. Welcome to Helsinki. Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. So I've got a few questions for you about how things looking with respect to remote work and multi-locality in Denmark. And I guess to start off with, maybe just giving us a kind of a bit of an overview of how you see the changes in Denmark post-COVID with relation to where people work and where they choose to settle down.
Yeah, first of all, we see that the people are taking up their lives to a review. Where do we want to live? Where do we want to stay after Corona? COVID-19 crisis. So in fact, the statistics says and shows us that people are not in big numbers, but still are moving out from Copenhagen, Aarhus, and other of the biggest cities in Denmark, but especially Copenhagen and Aarhus. We see that, and people are moving out because they want to be closer to the nature, closer to their relatives, to family, and they want their kids, their children, to grow up in a more safe environment, in safer communities, and where you are close to nature and where you can feel free, so to speak. So that is one point that we see post COVID-19, and on the other hand, we have had the shutdown of our community, our society during the COVID-19 period. So everyone that are able to work from a device, iPad, computer, or something like that, were staying at home, and that has shown both for the people who are working there, but also the companies, private companies and public companies, that people can work from their homes much more than we have seen so far. So in perspective as well, people are now moving because they are not that much dependent on the distance to their workspace anymore. At least not if they are working from a laptop or device. So the remote work is a new thing that is growing, and we hope that we can see that even more in the statistics in the future. People are not that much situated in the same place where their work is, and still it's we are seeing the small trends, but we hope this will grow and be more secure statistics.
So in terms of if we wanted to think about making the most of that potential going forward, what would be the kind of most important framework conditions that our politicians can put in place to support the rural development potentials of remote work in the Danish context?
Well, there's a lot of things that can be done. For instance, you could work with the whole taxation system and give more benefits if you live remote and work in in, for instance, one of the bigger cities, that you could have some taxation methods to encourage that way of moving out and still work, for instance, in a bigger city. At the same time, we, as all the Nordic countries, struggle with that's the broadband connection, the connection with high speed. And I know right now that we have the EU Commission saying that we want a 1 gigabit society where we all have to connect on the internet with high speed, and that requires also that the Danish government go that same way. And we have had a kind of a broadband subsidy that's where you can seek money every year in a certain amount, 100 million Danish crowns. So the remote places where you have not on market, where companies not on their own connect with high broadband, then yet they can have some subsidy to connect the remote areas. So that kind of ways of making the broadband connection net even better. We have also seen the co-work communities that can connect or consist of very diverse kind of remote workplaces. It can be entrepreneurial companies that starts up. So in fact, we could see that our government could maybe subsidy, give some subsidy in the beginning in the starting up with incubator environment / office communities / entrepreneurial house / a remote workplace. So a multifunctional co-work environment. So even at a local level, maybe at when we talk about the small towns, also that could be a way where people are not sitting at home on the first floor under the roof, but you having a community where you meet, where you work. So it's not the same as being at working at the head office, maybe 200 kilometers away, but you are together with colleagues and you have built up. Our government could subsidy that kind of remote buildings, and we hope that they will do that as well. So there's a broad kind of framework conditions that could be even better than we know right now. But we see that people have tried to, the summer houses have been a great seller. People are buying summer houses also because they use that for their work space if they are not connected to a family where they have to be with. And also the second home is also growing, flexboliger, as we call them in Danish, where they the real estate dealer says that they are also very attractive for people who wants to live and work another place than they do right now.
Thanks, Seven. Can you give us any kind of practical examples of how some of those things that you just described, are there any examples of those playing out now in different places in rural Denmark that you can share with us?
Yeah, I have, that's just one example, but a small village called Fjaltring with less than 200 people living there. On the edge of the west coast, only 100 meters from the west coast. They have made a co-work environment where they have entrepreneurs, startups, where they have workers, and where they work with both the companies that are and also are starting up. And they are between 12 and 14 full-time workers are working from that place in a small village, less than 200 people living there. On the first floor and down at the ground floor, there's a grocery store. So it can start up anywhere where there's people and people who want to do that. of course, it requires that you have people that wants to work with this, because non-government is going to offer that kind of facilities and do that on their own. It has to be the firing souls, as we call them, people who work with creating that kind of environment for co-work community.
Beautiful. That's a really nice example. And last question, and we'll make this one a quick one. But could this be a game changer for rural Denmark? What do you
I think it could. That depends on how people are thinking about the COVID-19 situation, and will this stick in our minds, and that we also in 1 or 2 years' time see, now I have the opportunity to move from one of the bigger cities to the rural areas. So if we have people who want to do that also in 6 months, 12 months, maybe 2 years' time, then I think it could end up with a kind of game changer, that we have disconnected where you work and where you live, and people who want to live where you have the environment, where you have your spare time, free time, facilities, and all the attractions. So I think it could be a game changer, and we would like, as an overall rural organization, to spread out all the good examples, and also say to the politicians in Copenhagen, come on, make better framework conditions for that kind of co-work environment, and also the remote workplace.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Stefan. And
you're welcome.
So the next stop in our Nordic tour will be... No, I'm not going to get a job on Eurovision, I don't think. Here it comes. Did you guess? Yes. is Norway, and I'm very happy to say that Norway has actually come to Helsinki today. So we are fully, I guess, embracing what we're talking about here today, and we're in we have our Nordic tour is a little bit hybrid. So I'd like to introduce to the stage Tor Arneson, Per Olav Lund, and Veronica Blumenthal from Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences. I like to hear a bit. I think we'll start maybe with Tor. Tor, you've been doing research, so I think we sometimes talk about this issue as if it's something that sort of this multi-locality sort of just happened overnight, but actually there are many people who've been doing research in this field for quite a long time, and Tor is one of them, so we're very happy to have him here. Can you tell us a bit about the way that multi-local issues have been experienced and discussed in Norway, and how that's kind of changed since the pandemic?
Well, we have approached this from a rural perspective. Originally working a lot on rural development, especially in the inner mountain area in Norway, comprised of, let's say, approximately 100 municipalities. And this area has been experiencing population decline, aging population, infertile population, etc. So you would think that all building activity would stop there, but that is not the case. In this same area, seen as a block, there are today just as many second homes as there are permanent residents. And these second homes, a good half of them, I would say 60% or something, are technically on par with a normal house. It's connected to the grid, physically, digitally, but often located not in the traditional municipal centers, but outside in what we call outfield land. So we now have there a divided housing structure. You have, which we could call the red housing structure, which is the traditional centers, and you have the, well, let's call them the green, the second home housing structure. And while the red housing structure is stagnant, the green is growing at a rate 3 to 4 to 1. So this is a very much an ongoing development. So now we have these second homes in this area.
And how do you see that tour evolving, sort of, as Ryan said, we hope that we come to a period that we can call post-pandemic. How do you see that kind of evolving, and how do you see sort of new forms of mobility around working life establishing in the Royal Summer?
Yes, definitely we see that already. It has been, I mean, this has been brewing for a while. These second homes and this green housing structure in these rural areas are a perfect and a very good platform for doing also work. So we see a lot of working from the second home, so it's definitely one of the material basis, I would say, one of the structures for living in an, what should we call it, an age of hybrids, hybrid homes, hybrid workplaces, etc., etc.
Thank you. And to sort of shift gears a little bit, Per-Olav, you have done some work looking at, there's been an evaluation at the university looking at how the online teaching experience was during the pandemic. Can you say a bit about that?
Yes, I can, because in March yesterday, last year, 2000, every teacher and every student was beaten to home because they closed campus. So, and we had no experiences with using digital platforms, teaching, meeting. So, so it was done an evaluation of the experiences, and first. Both employees and students was very satisfied with the use of digital platforms. And among the employees, the younger one was more satisfied than the elderly. That's not maybe so. But and the scientific employees were more satisfied than the administrative and the technical. But among the students, it was the opposite. The older one was more satisfied than the younger, and the students in the shorter courses was more satisfied than the students in the longer courses. And of course, for students using, they're living on campus, have friends, living the student life. Of course, they was not satisfied with the strict restrictions. So that did not function that well. I am a teacher myself, so I think I am satisfied myself. I can say that as well.
And what about looking to the future? Do you think that this remote working or remote study is something that will continue at the university?
Yes, the experience is that some students like to be in the digital platform. They don't have to have the camera on. They can be black. They can be a student when they like, and maybe do something else when they don't see. You said it was 300 persons looking at us on a computer now, and I just see 40 here. I can see what you think on what I'm saying, but I can't see the 300, what they think and not think. So, so in the teaching situation, my experience is that you have to be on the digital platform, or you have to be in the room, because it's very difficult to speak to or see what the students on the digital platform feel, or do they understand you or not. So the digital platform function well, but I think we are going to have these two paths because some students want to be on the digital platform, even if we are in the room.
Okay,
so, yeah.
So even though it's a bit tough, we have to get the hang of this hybrid business.
Yes, I believe so.
Veronica, I wanted to ask you, I think it was quite interesting in Norway with the ban on the use of second homes at different points during the pandemic. Could you say some words about that in the context of your research about social sustainability and second homes?
Yeah, because speaking of remote work, it was kind of interesting to see, at least in Norway, as soon as people were freed of kind of the shackles of having to be physically present at work, they rushed to their second homes and their cabins. And they came there and were not particularly welcome. So Norway instituted a cabin ban, so you are not allowed to go to your cabin. And that, I think for a lot of second homeowners, this resistance they met from the local community when they wanted to go to their cabins came as a bit of a surprise, because it came, in a sense, it became us versus them. Us, the locals, versus them, the second homeowners. And for a lot of the second homeowners, when you've done surveys with them and asked them about the relationship with the municipality where their second home is located, a lot of them really have a strong sense of place and a strong connection to the place. So in a way, the pandemic and this cabin ban kind of brought some conflicts that maybe have been simmering just right under the surface into the light, which for us spurred a project on social sustainability in relation to second homes. Because we're talking about second homes. Politicians love to talk about economic sustainability. And the others, like the environmental sustainability of second homes, that's kind of on the way up, and there's more research on that. Whereas on social sustainability, it's kind of like the ugly duckling that's been largely ignored. So we started a project where we're doing a systematic literature review on the research that has been done in the Nordic countries on second homes in relation to social sustainability, because we see there's really a need for a better understanding of the social issues related to second homes.
Sounds good. Sounds very interesting. Thank you. Don't leave yet. I wanted to see actually how it's looking out there, both in our physical audience and in our digital audience. Do we have any questions for the team?
Yes, we do. So actually about the second homes in rural areas, is this trend of remote work from second home is actually a temporary trend, or actually people move to live there for a longer time? What have you observed?
Well, maybe during the pandemic, it has reached a new height and probably will be going down a bit in volume, the amount of remote work here. But I think we're talking about a structural change here. So it will, I think, be more common to do remote work from the second home. Which, by the way, is we often talk about remote work from home, but remember that home is not a house. A home is a set of functions that you can divide between two houses, the residence house and the second home. So I think many would think about working from the second home as working from home. That's it.
Nice, thank you. Did either of you want to respond before to the same?
Yeah, just because a colleague just sent me some results actually, where they asked people about whether they would consider moving to their second home municipality, and the biggest barrier people say is work, the lack of relevant work opportunities there. So, and a lot of them say already they have good internet already, so it's just a matter of the employers being a bit more maybe open-minded to this idea of having people work from their second home.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the audience?
Oh, sorry, did the audience want to? No? Okay. No? Okay, thank you very much. And I was while we're talking about Norway, actually, I was quite interested to see that we're just putting together the data now for our next State of the Nordic Region report, which will be launched in March. And actually, the biggest gains with respect to connectivity have actually been in rural Norway in recent years. So I think that's maybe an interesting point. So the next stop on our Nordic tour will be... Between Sweden and Denmark. Our next stop on the Nordic tour is actually going to be Iceland, and so I'm going to be joined from Iceland this time by Hólmfríður Sveinsdóttir. Hey, Hólmfríður.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? Welcome
Good
to
see
Helsinki.
you.
Welcome to Helsinki.
Thank you. And welcome to Iceland.
Yeah. We are truly multi-local. I wonder how many of our audience are actually joining us from Iceland, actually. So I think for me, working with this issue of remote work and multi-locality, I think the Icelandic case is actually really interesting because, as always, you guys are very much ahead of the game and already. So perhaps you could tell me a little bit about what you were doing back in 2019 on this issue.
Well, yes. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a really important topic that you have chosen, and well done, Nordregio, with organizing all these things in this strange situation. Like we said, we have this policy about jobs without specified location, and we started it even before 2019. You can say we started it in 2017, and it's built on two pillars, so to speak. Firstly, it has been approved by our government in what is it called, government agreement, that is from November 2017, and it stated that ministry and institutions will be tasked with defining jobs and advertising them without a specific location as much as possible. The second pillar is that we have Alþingis, our parliament, approval in a parliamentary resolution on a strategic regional plan, and that is since 2018. This resolution takes the policy in further and is more specific. There, the aim is to ensure that minimum 10% of all advertised jobs at ministries and institutions shall be without a specific location by the end of the year 2024. That means that residents should not have influence on staff selections. And I also would like to mention that although it is mainly a regional matter, it is also about equality. It is regional in the sense of that it creates more diverse jobs, opportunities outside the capital area, outside the Reykjavik area. But it is equality in the sense that your residence does not exclude you from jobs that you are qualified for. Of course, the most qualified person will get the job, but the policy gives people living outside the Reykjavik area a unique chance to apply and get jobs in ministries or institutions without being forced to move to Reykjavik.
Nice, thank you. Okay, it sounds very good in theory, but how has it been in practice? How does one implement such a policy?
Well, that's another question. Well, yes, since we go as far as I think I can say 2017, and since then there has been a very strong emphasis on establishing a high-speed internet connection throughout the country. And we have had a great success there. So internet connections are not a problem, not even in the most remote areas. And then we have those two pillars from 1917 and 1918, and the approvals of both our government and our parliament are very important because those players are the biggest one. In 2019, the government appointed a committee to take this policy forward. And this committee has one specialist from each ministry. In some opinion, I'm sure it has gone a little bit too slow, but we are definitely moving in the right direction. In the beginning of 2020, in the very beginning of the pandemic, all the ministries and their institutions here in the capital area were asked to define which jobs don't need a specific location. And the outcome was that the 10% goal can be reached by the year 2024. And there's quite a lot of jobs that can't be worked from without the walls of the institutions here in the capital area. However, we also made a web survey, and 71% of managers of ministries and institutions consider it rather or very unlikely that their institution could reach the limit of 10% by the year 2024. So that tells us that there is a job to be done there.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I would like to mention that people are not expected to work from their homes because we have numerous offices available all over the country, or some kind of co-working hubs that you were talking about earlier. And we have information about all these offices on our websites. And at the moment, I just checked this morning, there is a little over 100 available offices, and I'm sure there are even more if you look better.
Mm.
But I think I can allow myself to say that our infrastructure is ready for the task, but the question is maybe, are we ready? And I'm not sure we are, because we are facing some obstacles in ourselves, so to speak, and it is mainly our culture and structure that stands in our way, and those 71% of skeptical managers are maybe an example of that.
Can you speak a little bit, Honfriður, to has the pandemic played any role in, that survey was in the early 2020, right?
Yes.
Do you think that you would get a different response if you made a similar survey today, or?
Absolutely. We had this unexpected help from the pandemic. And I think the pandemic has brought us a brand new world, and gives maybe a hope for remote areas. And we need to take very good care of this new world and handle it with care.
Mm. So what's next? How do we do? What's next for Iceland on remote work?
I'm quite. I'm a believer. I believe that we will take some big positive steps in the coming months. Actually, today we are in a way on a standby mode for two reasons, as I have mentioned already. Firstly, we are waiting for a new government and its agreement. We are expecting a new government in a couple of days, I think. I really hope and I believe that jobs without specific location will be mentioned in that document, although I can't be sure, of course. And secondly, we are also waiting to see the destiny of renewed parliamentary resolutions. There is a proposal that is waiting for Alþingis, of course, both waiting for the new government and then the parliamentary approval. But I can tell you that the new proposal, we take the policy even further. The suggestion is that all new jobs that are not local in nature will be defined without specific location. That is, instead of defining which jobs can be without a specific location, we reverse the burden of proof and will define those jobs that are dependent on specific locations. But as I said, it waits Alþingis approval. But next steps, in my opinions, are twofold. First, the ministries need to monitor their institutions and themselves as well better and ensure that jobs will be advertised without location limitation. And secondly, education information, mainly for directors and managers in the administrations. We need to change our structure and culture. I think managers of ministries and institutions need to be more aware about these possibilities. They need to see the light, if you can say so. When it is my belief that when one has learned and understand the ideology behind this policy, it is a no-brainer to follow it.
Thank you so much, Hólmfríður. I think that's great. It's a really interesting idea that we should have to justify why we need to be in place rather than justify why we cannot. Before we can you
we
hang
have
around?
A question, actually,
yeah,
as
can
well.
you hang around for 1 minute for a question from the audience?
Yeah, sure,
Yes,
sure.
Thanks.
Yes, it's from the digital audience. The question is, you mentioned that you monitored institutions and managers about their, I hope you hear me well, yes. So you monitor institutions and managers, and how about workers? Do they also feel that their job could be done remotely?
It's a good question, and I think, yeah, but we have a work to do there. And I think that is among our next steps to introduce it better, both for workers and managers. So the infrastructure is here, and now we need to just let people know about these possibilities.
We have a final comment. I was just curious also if you've seen, we talked about the migration patterns and the statistics in the other countries where we actually see some rural regions growing population-wise for the first time in several decades. Have you seen any of that in rural Iceland as well, now during the pandemic?
Yes, we have, and I know about some. We are so few, so we know almost everyone here. But yeah, I've heard about.
You know who moved?
Yeah, I know who moved. Do you want their names? No, but yeah, I think it will. It has started to change, and I think really it will change quite rapidly from now on. I really hope so.
We have one more question.
Yeah, Iceland was highlighted in a Swedish article this week about digital nomads and opening up visum processes for easier or to become easier to visit for a longer period of time. Is that something that you're currently working on and planning to expand, or how have you seen any effects of it?
I've heard about it, but I can't give any comments on that. But I think it's not relevant to this because at this policy we are mainly focusing on how to give more job opportunities in the remote areas or outside the capital area. But this, what you are mentioning, it's supporting it, I think. It support each other.
Thanks so much, Hólmfríður. Thank you for joining us. And
thank you.
We hope to see you soon. And this will be the last stop on our Nordic tour. We will head to That wasn't a technical glitch. We have a joint entry this year from Sweden. We are going to go now to the cross-border region of Greater Copenhagen. And I think for those of you who are maybe less familiar with the Nordic cooperation, the Nordic Prime Ministers set a vision several years ago that they wanted the Nordic region to become the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. And a big part of that is people moving across borders for a bunch of reasons, but one of those being for work. And I think for me, a really interesting aspect of this issue is the way that when we think about remote work, pretty much any region can be a cross-border region. So you can live in one region and commute to another. So I think we have a lot to, and we know actually that that's not as simple as it sounds. So I think we have a lot to learn from our friends in the physical cross-border regions about what the potential barriers to, and opportunities might be in that space. So I'm really happy to welcome Kate Plaskonis from one of our thematic groups to the stage.
Thank you, Linda.
From Greater Copenhagen region. And I want to start by just asking you, so we know during the pandemic many people were sort of forced to work from home, we didn't have another option. How was that for cross-border workers in the Greater Copenhagen region?
Well, I remember when Denmark closed its borders in March 2020, and it came pretty much as a shock for everyone. Firstly, because of the silent admission that the free movement is taken for granted, but also because there was kind of this feeling of uncertainty, what will happen, how do people work, and it wasn't until later that people realized, and companies and decision-making makers realized how big the consequences of the whole lockdown and the whole freedom of movement admission were. So we're talking about a lot of people who lost their jobs, especially when it comes to hotel and restaurants. We have Copenhagen Airport that pretty much a lot of jobs just disappeared. But also for the people who were working from home, there were like several issues that became on top of the agenda, mainly when it came to social security and taxation.
I've heard quite a lot about this, that there were these kind of barriers, but I guess I would like to know, like in kind of a concrete terms, like my internet works. We just talked to Iceland. I can telecommute to Denmark, right? What specifically were the challenges?
No, I feel like that every time Denmark just comes to speak, it's all about taxes, but I will take that. So the regulation of taxation in Greater Copenhagen since 2003, it's regulated by Øresund Agreement, which states that pretty much if a cross-border commuter works 50% of their working hours in the country of residence, means that they should pay their taxes there. So this was quite problematic because people had to have this administration and stating that they were both having taxes in Denmark and Sweden, and it was quite of a hassle for those commuters who were living in Sweden and commuting to Denmark. But it was even worse for those commuters who were living in Denmark and traveling to Sweden, because they also had to pay higher taxes in Sweden. So the issue was quite problematic, and it became even more problematic because since 2001 there is a new Swedish act in force that states that all of the foreign companies have to register themselves as economic employers in case if they have workers in Sweden. So obviously the idea of the new act is not to make life harder for commuters, but rather to have control over taxation, and that foreign companies do not systematically use Swedish employees and pay taxes in foreign companies. But what made it quite interesting is that now during the corona, where a lot of people were working from home, Danish companies were facing to pay taxes in Sweden, and that made it unattractive to have Swedish employees. But it also made some companies force their employees to commute to the office despite the recommendations that we have from central health authorities. So that was quite a big problem, and it is still a problem if we're looking on this digital or semi-digital workplace where people can either commute few days in a week and then the rest work in the office, or where people can work in the office fully.
Okay, so if we put the pandemic aside for a moment, Kate, and just think about in general the opportunities that remote work might offer for cross-border integration, what do those opportunities look like? So for example, if we imagine those barriers could be put aside, what are the opportunities for a region like Greater Copenhagen region?
Well, I think that Greater Copenhagen, Sweden and Denmark, and also the Nordics, they are among the front runners when it comes to digital competences, and these are things that we shouldn't take for granted. According to the latest report from region of Scania, that is a part of Greater Copenhagen, around 160,000 people, which is 28% of the people living in region Scania, can work remotely. So it's not a question of whether they want to, but actually can. And in Malmö, that is the southern city in Sweden, the number is as high as 37%. So I mean, not using those opportunities in the world where we have labor shortage, specifically when it comes to IT and not only white collar, blue collar, like we are in labor shortage when it comes to different branches. So those opportunities should be used. And I would even follow the Icelandic line a little bit, but we should not waste a good crisis. I mean, we shouldn't take these things for granted, and especially if we can impact and affect them.
Okay, that sounds like a really nice ending note, but I actually have one more question for you. What do we do about it? What's your recommendations to remove these barriers?
I think that there are pretty much two key messages I have, and the first one is that Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, they should have a common strategy to manage the crisis and the opportunities that comes with crisis, because we often talk about threats, but I also want to talk about opportunities. We should have a strategy to manage them. And the second key message is just to fix the taxes. I mean, look over the Öresund Agreement, look over the new Swedish Act and make it easier both for commuters and for companies to go over to digital and semi-digital workplace.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Thank you.
Does anyone have a question for Kate before we wrap up? You got any questions there in the audience? I guess in that case, I will just take a minute.
It's quite clear.
Yeah, we covered it. We solved it all.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
Thank you so much to all of our participants in the Nordic tour. And just before I hand back over to Ryan, I guess I want to just let you know that we will be going on a more prolonged Nordic tour for the next couple of years within our thematic groups. We have several large projects on this topic. So I hope that this will be actually the first of many conversations that we have with our colleagues working out in the different countries. So I hand back to you.
Thank you, Linda. Welcome. So, to start to wrap things up for today, the Nordic region has a collective vision to be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. As a part of that action, to realize this action, we carry out research and collaboration projects in 3 thematic groups, each of which consist of national, regional, and cross-border representatives from around the Nordic region. So we're joined by 2 of our 3 thematic group chairpersons here with us today. So first we have Daniel Ondre from the National Board of Housing, Building and Planning in Sweden, Boverket, who is the chair of the thematic group on green and inclusive urban development. Daniel, what are your kind of key takeaways or main messages from today?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of angles and perspectives presented here today, and I mean, there's a lot of uncertainties, a lot of questions still regarding the impacts and the significance of this remote work and how permanent is this trend, what are the risks, what are the benefits, and foremost maybe how can we make use of this shift to transform to a more climate neutral and social inclusive society. So I take with me a lot of takes on all of these aspects, and foremost because our thematic group works with spatial planning is a big part of it, and spatial implications, and there's been a lot of interesting presentations about both the what do you say, how it could be unequal between social groups and different type of regions with different conditions for remote work, but also this the trends that you can see in the Finland. The report is coming to be published. You see some big cities benefiting, but it's a suburbanization trend. And this type of evidence will be very interesting to follow. But it's I think also just a final thing to say is all of this presentations also that show that you can work very proactively as well. You're not you don't have to wait for the impacts of this. You can work with scenarios that we saw in OECD. You can work with co-working hubs, the attractiveness of small and medium-sized cities, for example. So I think there's a lot of takes that we can get from this conference to our working group.
Excellent. I agree that the issue of social equity and the equitable transition, if there is one, towards remote work, and the social implications. We've heard about that today, and that's, I think, an important thing for us in our thematic group to carry forward. So that's a great point. We also have with us Benedikt Akre from the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization in Norway, who is the chair of the thematic group on green and inclusive rural development. Benedikt, what are some key takeaways that you had today from maybe a more rural perspective?
Well, firstly, I think I like the fact that we almost ended with Winston Churchill's shouldn't let a good crisis go to waste. And I have to say that I do like the optimism of all this debate, of all the potential, all the possibilities. But I think we had the good fortune of having a discussion this morning, actually, in our thematic group, and there were some excellent points that were made also from a rural perspective. One of which is remote from what, and where is your place of employment, actually? Because we're looking at a demographic change in the rural areas. There's quite significant, and a lot of businesses and organizations are struggling to recruit people. And perhaps it's a solution that you can work from other places, but it also doesn't really give you the opportunity to recruit inhabitants necessarily. You might as well live in the urban center and work in the rural area without really having a strong connection to the rural area, which I think is an interesting point to take forward. And perhaps related to that, we're also discussing that we don't necessarily agree with or like the word remote. That in many ways it's more about being flexible, and some people were talking about hybrid solutions. Personally, I have to say that I still enjoy the company of my colleagues, and the point about the different types of tasks, different types of jobs that require presence or lend themselves to remote working or flexible working, I think is an important point. I fully agree that the state might be lagging behind, and that we have a lot of things to learn from the private sector, perhaps, but both on the positive and the negative side. And I think that's the main takeaway, that there are lots of opportunities for rural areas as well. Mm-hmm. There could be like work for your partner. There could be an increase in the recruitment pool for local employers, for example, or the possibility to live at your cabin. But there are also risks. There's a risk of polarization of jobs, that there are jobs that can be done remotely and the ones that can't, and perhaps also regions. And I think that's also an important aspect to have in mind. I fear for the loss of the work community as well, to be honest. And I like the point also about the impact on the climate footprint. And so I think my main takeaway, I like also the fact that it was raised today that this is a bit of a buzzword. We're in the pandemic and we're talking about a new normal. I'm not so sure, as many people here have said today, that it's not so new. It's a discussion that's been going on for quite a while. It has been boosted by the pandemic and going back to the crisis that shouldn't be gone to waste. But it's also not over. And I'm not sure that we do know the new normal just yet. And I think that's also an important point to keep in mind, that we don't really know the long-term impacts of this, both on the opportunity side and the risk side. But I like perhaps that we can keep an eye on both. And finally, I see that it's a great value of Nordic cooperation, because there's so many different examples and we work with this in different ways, and we can definitely learn from each other. And I really look forward to the ongoing work of Nordregio for this, for all the thematic groups on this.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Benedicte, and thank you, Daniel, for your feedback. I'll ask Nordregio's director to join me quickly to my left. And maybe you can just say a few words about your reflections and also maybe say a word or two about what is on for day 2 of the Nordregio Forum.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And if you agree that remote working could be a part of a green transition, then don't miss out on tomorrow's session on leading the green transition. Let's start with saying that so you don't forget about it. I will come back to it later again. And I thought it was a lot of takeaways for me, actually. The problem of remote, the multifunctional of homes. My home could be where I put my hat. That could be one of the functions of a home. So what is remote working? But as we heard from Remote Lab and from Norway, remote working is a long-term trend. But as we heard from Lamia, the pandemic has caused this global shift that almost 40% of workers has actually tried to remote working now. So we have really a global shift. And also we heard from Denmark that they are discussing do we see a migration out of the city centers to the surrounding communities where you can commute to work instead. And there they are discussing lowering taxes on secondary homes to make this possible. In other countries, like in Finland and Sweden, we actually discuss increasing taxes on secondary homes from the equality reason. So it's very interesting to see how will the different policies form. And I think the focus now need to actually, we are in the very early stages. So we need to build knowledge about the secondary effects that you started to talk about, you and Linda, in the beginning. So we have a solid base for policy formation, because we can't run away and think that some of the trends we see right now, in the middle of the pandemic, which is actually increasing now in the 4th wave, should be the final solution. We need to build knowledge in all our projects, how to form a base for solid policy formation. Mm-hmm. So with that, I would like to reach out some thanks to the State Secretary Jukka Johannes, who was here earlier, and also for the Finnish chairmanship to having us here. I will thank all you in the audience, both online and here in at the premises at the Nordic Culture Point. I want to reach out a very good thank you to our eminent moderators, you and Linda. I think it's very interesting to have solid researchers as moderators, because you can pose those very frank and direct questions based on your knowledge in the subject matter. So you really noticed how the participant from Iceland, she had to compose herself when the direct question came from Linda. It was very good to have this very open and frank and transparent discussion. I think that's very important for this kind of meetings. And I will thank all our speakers for very contributing to very interesting perspectives and content to this meeting. So see you again tomorrow in session 2 on the green transition. Thank you very much.
So on behalf of Linda and myself and all of us at Nordregio, thank you very much for joining us, and see you tomorrow.